love you, you cow. My name is Matthew Kroll.
And the best description of a cube is the cube itself. My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film The Brutalist.
You just came out of The Brutalist.
Oh, like a second ago.
And for those who are in the know, The Brutalist won Best Feature Film, Best Drama at the Golden Globes just a few weeks ago.
Adrien Brody won Best Actor.
And Adrien Brody won Best Actor. Brady Corbet won Best Director. And it is a 3.5 hour experience. It's a 3.5 film with an intermission.
Yep.
And I know it was difficult for you to get out to go see it because it's only playing in a couple of theaters as well.
I caught it on the last day it was playing in New York.
Yeah, and that was the thing that we were sort of trying to struggling to get to as well, is that its release schedule was changing. It's currently playing in 70mm prints as well as regular prints as well, or regular projection as well. I sort of, was like, hey, if we're doing this, you should probably try to go and experience it as a 70mm experience. Where did you end up going? Tell me about your experience.
I did see it in 70mm. I saw it at Lincoln.
Okay.
I saw it at a 4 p.m. showing.
Yeah.
And it's funny because it's such a long film. It's only playing because it's 70mm. They can only play it, I think, in Theater 2, which is the King Theater. I don't remember the name or their naming conventions. But basically, we get there, and I thought either you or maybe Patrick Willems had told me, like, oh, well, they don't play trailers before that.
Yeah.
They did.
So,
but hold on, no, it's not a big deal. Yeah. But like, I normally time out my movies because I'm like, I don't need to be here for all this shit. Yeah. So like, I get to the movie a half hour later. Yeah. So then this time I was like, no, I got to get there at 4. But it's funny because it's so long. The theater crew, like the cleaning crew between, doesn't have a ton of time to do anything. So we get there, and at like 3:55, the theater is exiting, and then it takes 10 to 15 minutes for the people to clean the theater. And for the first time in a long time, this is a kind of a cool, interesting thing.
Yeah.
It was a group of people, and again, that I will quantify it as the type of film goers who will go see a 4 p.m., 3.5 hour long film in 70mm in the middle of the week.
Yeah.
Just standing around outside, sort of milling about. And I gotta say, even just like minor little conversations or things like that, it was just nice.
Yeah.
Like it was honestly a lot of older people, but there was a surprising amount of, I feel like, young people as well, sort of going, and people that are very interested in movies. And it was a weird sort of camaraderie experience of just like hanging out and like just bullshitting about like, oh, what's this going to be? I've heard this, I've heard that. It was very, very nice. And then it did have trailers, which was so funny. And I was like, God damn it. But seeing the 28 years later trailer in a theater was very nice. I appreciated that. And then this is the last thing I'll say about the experience. Because I got my ticket so late because I didn't know if I could actually make this work. Yeah. I was in row D16.
Yeah.
So I was like sitting with my neck like jammed over.
Were there empty seats?
No.
There were no full house.
I think the front row and maybe a little of row 2 on the sides had empty seats.
Okay.
I got the best seat I could.
Okay.
And it was nice because it was a full theater, and it was also really cool when intermission happened. It felt like a play.
Yeah. I wanted you to experience it because I went to the Village East Angelica screening of it. So the Village East has a beautiful 70mm theater, or they're a theater. It's a classic old movie house. It's got, beautiful ceiling and old chairs and that sort of thing. And it was a 70mm print. That was the theater that didn't play trailers, like, because it was an 8 o'clock showing. They just start them. They basically give you 10 minutes to mill about and get into your seat.
Yeah.
And then they just start the movie straight up. No trailers, nothing. And I loved it. And then there's that other experience, which is that it has a timed intermission as well. And during the intermission, it is like theater. It is like going to the theater, which is that, I went to a screening where I picked a seat where I was between other couples. I was there by myself. And, I got into little conversations. It was very polite. People were milling about, relaxing during the intermission. A couple people went and got drinks. A couple people came out and just kind of like milled about the sort of this beautiful auditorium. I took a few photos while I was there, and it was just lovely. It was just a lovely, warm theater going experience. And we'll get into the movie very shortly. I loved the experience of watching this movie. And I know there's a temptation here. I think I tweeted about this week. There's like a little bit of brutalist hesitancy in terms of like, it's 3.5 hours. You're going to be spending 4 hours kind of on your journey. And in New York, for example, is very cold right now. Shout out to LA where they're experiencing wildfires and maybe going to the movies is a little bit more tricky. So saying this with a grain of salt, it's very cold. It's hard to get out. It is easier to stay at home and watch whatever is playing at home. Brutalist has come to us after significant praise, awards. It is sort of a front runner in the Oscar race right now. And I will say, kind of like we had this conversation around Martin Scorsese's The Irishman, which played on Netflix, and you could watch it at home on Netflix. There is something very special about seeing a movie that is this long, that has come with the moniker of monumental. We will talk about that moniker in a little bit for whatever it means. But actually just making the experience kind of, in my worldview, again, it's weird. I always use religious terms for a person who's not religious, but there's a kind of a nice pilgrimage quality to it, like of going to see this movie, making the effort to go out and see it, and kind of just sitting back and letting it do its thing, because it is quite an enveloping experience.
Yeah, I will agree. I will yes and you on that note and say, I think The Irishman is a very apt sort of comparison or thing to weigh it against, because I agree that this does feel a bit like a pilgrimage and like an event.
It feels like an event.
Yeah, the difference, I think, with The Irishman, even if The Irishman was released in theaters, I don't know if I would have felt as though the pilgrimage was worth it. Not that no shade to The Irishman, but it does feel like a film that was, in part at least, designed, and it feels like like Netflix was its home.
Yeah, I mean,
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, they did make that point that you could watch it at home, and they released it as well. This, Brady Corbet has said it as much. The fact that it was filmed in VistaVision, the fact that it is so much about the American story and landscape, it does feel like there's a very pointed note to say this is a theater-going movie. So you should go see this in a theater.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you went and you got to see it right before it closes out. I think it having won the Golden Globes, it'll have a fairly long-standing run if it can make money.
It'll keep making screenings happen if that's the case. I am curious, because I do know for the rest of the week, I think in New York at that point of recording, there are no more screenings. But it feels like with the Golden Globes win, they'll probably put it back in a few places.
Yeah. And I think it'll become kind of like a sort of Interstellar type thing, which is that it has like a sort of appointment screenings where you can go see it. And again, the version that we both saw, it was shot in VistaVision with 16 millimeter and Betamax and a bunch of other formats in it. But the print is actually a 70 millimeter print. And it is, so we're going to take mini sidetracks right now.
Well, it's part of the journey of the film.
Right now, there is anniversary screenings of Seven in IMAX, which kind of playing. A friend of mine, shout out to Zach, went, and apparently his theater was entirely empty.
Really?
Yeah. But just it's a harder movie to get to and convince people. But there were full house screenings of it. And that movie has been remastered for the IMAX experience. I don't think it fills the full IMAX. But a few years ago, I was in London at the BFI in South Bank, and I saw actually, we were there on the same trip, I think. We were there working for the EMAs or something like that. And
I've been to London once for the EMAs.
Yeah. And I remember like rushing after work, rushing over to the BFI, and seeing, I've told this story on the podcast before, but running in to see a copy of Seven.
Yes.
That they had found they were using an original silver nitrate print of the film. And I was like, I love the sort of warmth feeling of watching an old silver nitrate print. But I was like, I think maybe I'm spoiled a little bit, which is that, I grew up in the DVD and Blu-ray era, whereas like a DVD and Blu-ray is like really pristine, and you sort of get all the quality, all the sort of like inherent image quality that the filmmaker intended without any of the degradation of the image that comes with a print. So I was like, as much as I'm like a purist and like, let's go see a film print, I was watching going, I kind of, do want to watch the digital projection more.
I got you. That sounds more, maybe not more interesting. The only thing I got to see on that trip was the Spice Girl steps.
Okay.
I went to the place where that first Spice Girl, if you want to be my lover, song.
This could not be more of a Shahir and Matt story.
Well, no, but it's funny because
you went to see the Spice Girl steps. I went to see Seven.
Yeah, I danced down the steps, and that was the one.
And I was like a miserable
thing.
fuck talking about like the Seven Deadly Sins.
That was the one touristy thing I got to do on that trip.
Yeah. It was a fun trip. It was many years ago, by the way.
God,
so long ago. Anyway. If you have come this far, listen to the episode. Thank you for watching. I hope you've gotten to see The Brutalist in a good print. And we have an email that we will read now, or that I will read, that'll hopefully catch us up.
Shahir will now read the email that he will read.
I will also announce everything I'm about to do as I'm about to do it.
I will announce Shahir announcing what he's announcing that he will be doing.
Thank you very much. Prashant writes, hey, Matt and Shahir, Happy New Year. Hope you're both well. It's been a while since I last wrote. I spent most of December watching films you covered in the fall, so here are a few thoughts on them. First, in the Topam tradition, I'm composing this email amidst your Sonic 3 episode to try and beat you both to a Fast and Furious comparison. I believe Sonic 4 should unironically be called Fast and Furious. Thank you, Prashant.
The Sonic community approves of your sacrifice.
As for Gladiator 2, this film is to Shahir what Gareth Edwards' 2023 film, The Creator, was for me. Imperfect but enjoyable cinema. But the question is, which do you think of more, Shahir? The baboon from Gladiator 2 or the monkey from The Creator? The monkey from The Creator is going to win every time. That monkey had mastered human technology.
You really latched on to that monkey.
The monkey threw a bomb, then walked over to another place, found the detonator, opened the switch, and clicked it as though it knew what radio control was.
Listen, cool primates don't look at explosions.
Yeah. It understood technology better than most humans would. I also thought you were, going back to Prashant here, I also thought your discussion on Honora, especially the ending of the film, was insightful. Personally, it really took me out of the film. While there was a great deal of humanizing sex workers, it felt like liberal trappings, particularly the imagination of men writing compelling women characters. There are, of course, notable exceptions to this, including 2024's Furiosa. Just to say this, I think that's a fair point, other than the fact that Sean Baker has been writing about sex workers in his films for many years now. And I agree that there is a wash of female characters written by men. That is simply an unavoidable fact and completely true. I do think that film is better than that, but agree on that point. I will be writing to you in a few weeks with my best films of 2024. Again, just for the listeners, this is me coming out. We probably won't get to that till March or something like that because of the way that we schedule the podcast and because of the way we've been trapped in a cycle of 52 weeks of podcasting before we do our top 10 every year since 20.
Eventually, we're going to lap ourselves.
Some point we'll catch up. Yeah.
Not catch up. We'll be so behind that we'll be doing our best of 2027 and 2029.
If you have suggestions about this, write us in an Only Movie Podcast. And then finally, so I'll be writing to you in a few weeks for my best films of 24, which follows India's tax year of April to March, also New Zealand. So I include films that either release late or I'll have a chance to watch later. I hope you cover some of them, like The Brutalist and All We Imagine Is Light, the Indian film that I've been excited to see, which I'm especially looking forward to as a portrait of my home city. Good luck for 2025. Cheers, Prashant. Thank you, Prashant.
Thank you, Prashant.
Yes, All We Imagine Is Light is a film I have talked about to you as well. I think I would like to do that on the podcast at some point. And we are here for The Brutalist.
I'm going to tell you what the Internet Movie Database calls The Brutalist. When a visionary architect and his wife flee post-war Europe in 1947 to rebuild their legacy and witness the birth of modern United States, their lives are changed forever by a mysterious wealthy client. Okay. We don't know who the canonically singular human being is that writes every description on the Internet Movie Database.
I feel like you have some umbrage here.
Well, it's improper grammar and it's a bad description. I give this description of this film a 2 out of 10.
I am Brady Corbet notes that with continued interest.
Yeah. I'm sure he's listening right now.
Yeah. Interestingly, I think we might have been the only podcast on the planet. This was called out. CJ Johnson from ABC Australia reached out to us. And, we did a couple of podcasts with him. He's been on. We should have him back on, actually. I haven't talked to him in a while. But CJ Johnson wrote to us at that time, and he was like, you know what? I was looking for a podcast about Brady Corbett's first feature, Children of a Leader, and I think you guys were legitimately the only ones that covered that movie.
Yes, the namesake is true.
In the history of this podcast, that has been one of maybe a handful of instances where we have been the only podcast about movies, talking about Brady Corbett's directorial feature. Brady Corbet is, of course, an actor who's been prolific on the indie scene, most notably perhaps in working with the Borderline filmmakers, Antonio Campos and Sean Durkin, whose film we did, The Iron Claw, just recently as well. Also one of my favorite filmmakers on the planet. He worked with Michael Haneke on the remake of Funny Games. Now, Brady Corbet is only 36 years old. It just occurred to me recently that he acted as one of the leads along Michael Pitt in Michael Haneke's film Funny Games when he was 18 years old.
Right.
Have you seen Funny Games?
No.
Do you know what Funny Games is about?
No.
Funny Games is an incredibly brutal, difficult to watch film about two very young assailants who basically do a home invasion on a sort of unsuspecting family. Funny Games was originally made in German, where Michael Haneke is from, but remade as an American film with Naomi Watts and Tim Roth, I believe. Yeah, Tim Roth, with Michael Pitt and Brady Corbet as well. It was kind of it was one of those instances where the director remade his own film and pretty much did it exactly the same, which is fascinating. But this is all to say, Brady Corbet has been in the industry working for at least the last 20 years. And he has made the jump into director over the last 10 years. Again, with Childhood of a Leader, the film that we did here, which we both liked. What was your feeling about it?
So there's a funny thing that happened that I don't normally do.
Okay.
And after watching The Brutalist on the very cold walk home, I don't normally take a longer walk to a longer subway station just to think about the movies when I leave Lincoln. Okay. I don't jump on the closest one. Even when it's cold or shitty out, I tend to just do the walk around the park.
Mm-hmm. The walk of shame.
Yeah. Or the stride of pride.
The stride of pride. That's good. I like that.
And I popped on our old ass episode on Childhood of a Leader. This episode number 55 or 56, I can't remember. Brandon McCarthy from No Fucking ZD was on that episode.
On Childhood of a Leader?
Yeah.
I have not listened to it again.
It was 2016, I think October. So nearly 9 years ago. 8 or 9 years ago. I was
just texting with Brandon last night.
And I was listening to two things. I'm going to sidestep for a moment.
Yeah.
Man, we got old.
Really quick?
Like not really quick. 9 years. I was listening to the banter, the I don't know, the flow, and I was like, ooh, yeah, this is fucking cooking. Let's go.
Oh, yeah?
So we're going to get back there. We're going to find it. You should listen to the episode. It's really good.
I think, just before you move on to that, I think the thing is that was also a period where we were figuring each other out.
Maybe. I don't know. We seem pretty intimate, to be perfectly honest. It's an interesting listen. After this episode, if you're interested, especially in Brady Corbet and his filmography, definitely go listen to that episode. But the Matt and Shahir I can hear the age differential. And I'm not saying that what we're doing now is worse. I'm saying it is different.
So what was noticeable about, we
were so maybe it was better. We were very fast. Okay. Every joke or every jab or everything that we were doing, the other one was just on it. On it.
Right.
And it was frenetic.
Okay.
And I was like, damn, man, who are these cool two young film critiquers? Actually, 3 at that point, because obviously Brandon was on there. That's not what I want to talk about. That was just a funny thing.
Okay.
You had just said, we think we liked it. We all, mainly me, Brandon and I, liked elements of it, but felt overall that it was lacking in a few places.
Right.
And I was interested because, again, when you've done over 500 of these podcasts, especially if it's not a film that lives in your consciousness for a long period of time, I tend to forget what my initial opinions are. So when listening to that episode, I was like, I don't remember what I thought of it. I don't remember, like, I didn't have a strong love or hate for it.
Yeah.
And it turns out it was one of basically films that I think does a couple things exquisitely, and then some things that just sort of drop the ball. You can go listen to that about Childhood of a Leader. But the interesting thing here for me, listening to what we all thought of that film, was in 8 or 9 years, how far I think Brady Corbet has come. Because I see a lot of the same affectations. I don't want to say trappings because that makes it sound negative. Stylistic choices, vibes that are coming across in The Brutalist, but it feels like he found a way to make them like fully work. Because we were all, again, I'll just speak for me. I don't want to speak for you or Brandon on the show.
What did I say about the movie? Because I remember the movie. I don't remember what I said about the movie.
You weren't like glowing about it, but you weren't as critical as we were.
Okay.
It didn't feel, honestly, it didn't feel like any of us were raving one way or the other, but there were elements to it where we're like, well, we really liked the way the opening credits were treated in X, Y, and Z. I believe that the term that I kept using was, it felt like it did a bunch of things really, really, really well and cool, but then every one of those things, it was like, see what I did there? See what I did there? See what I did? Like, it had a real, like, look at this cool thing I'm doing, sort of, because it would be overstay its welcome in a way. In The Brutalist, every bit of that affect is washed away, and it's so funny because it's a 3 hour and 30 something minute movie.
Yeah. I
did not feel that runtime at all.
That was why I really wanted you to go see it, because the 3.5 hours, once you're sitting in the chair, does not feel at all like 3.5 hours. Like, it is genuinely one of the few singularly propulsive films I've seen in a while, which just moves at a pace that makes you feel like things are happening at all times, and that the story is moving forward. And I know this is simplistic in terms of what we're talking about, but but for a movie that is 3.5 hours long about a Hungarian architect who has immigrated to America, I know that, like, on paper that could be a hard sell. Brady Corbet himself, I think, in his speech said the same things, which is like, there's lots of people that will tell you no to a film like this because it doesn't involve IP, doesn't involve superheroes, doesn't involve major set pieces or anything like that. It involves the slow progression of the journey of an artist over the course of his life. And yet, despite everything that I've said to you that makes it sound slow on paper, it does not feel slow. It feels warm. And then the thing, my memory of Childhood of a Leader is really struck by both a young artist who has ambition to make a certain type of movie. And what I loved about watching The Brutalist, the opening shots of the film, not maybe the first 2 shots, but the third shot, which is a long single take that comes out of darkness into light, where the vision of America is presented to us in a sort of ironic way.
A skewed way, one might say.
An inverted Statue of Liberty. Really, what I was like, oh yes, this is the filmmaker that made Childhood of a Leader, which has that same shot as its final shot. Like the beginning and end vision. And in both cases, interestingly, in Childhood of a Leader, we're talking about a country that is descending into fascism, or descending into some form of dictatorial opposition.
Which would never happen here.
And then a sort of pointed opening shot here, which is of America inverted in a way that we've seen it. But while also simultaneously having this kind of triumphant, beautiful score to it. So there's this like contravening sense of what he's trying to do here. And I think that's the filmmaker. I think that was the filmmaker in Childhood of a Leader. This is a filmmaker. I was listening to Adam Naiman over the Ringer podcast, who wrote about Paul Thomas Anderson, and the essay that is keep coming up around this film is Manny Farber's essay on elephant art versus termite art. Have you ever read that or know about that?
What is that?
So Manny Farber is an art critic from the 60s, I believe, wrote a paper on elephant art versus termite art. I actually read it this week just to kind of refresh my memory. But his idea was that and Adam Naiman at the Ringer, so I want to give full credit to this, to him for this, is it refers to kind of like what Peter says in Family Guy about The Godfather. He was like, it insists upon itself. He was like, why don't you like The Godfather? He goes, it insists upon itself, which I think is what you're saying about Childhood of a Leader,
yes.
Which is what is kind of leveled at The Brutalist in some way, which is that this idea of monumental cinema, elephant cinema, cinema that is grand in scope and scale and ambition, versus termite cinema, which what he calls termite cinema, which basically gnaws away at the edges of what we already have and forms new ground.
Yeah.
And I think there's that conversation around elephant versus termite in this movie.
Well, it's funny,
but I love the ambition. That's what I'm going to say.
I think I completely agree. Sort of the elephant cinema for childhood. I think this though doesn't click that for me. This feels so effective that it's never once in no, not even the criticisms that I will level to this movie.
Yeah,
I don't think fall into the. I haven't used this term in a while, but my very crass way of saying the way that we're saying what we're saying right now is a movie that loves the smell of its own farts.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that Childhood of a Leader has some of those tendencies. I whiffed none of that.
Okay.
I feel like every lesson, like, again, it's 8 or 9 years of a very talented filmmaker. Like, there's no way they don't learn these lessons. This is the second film with a somewhat long runtime about a architect that could be thrown in various ways into the thing of elephant cinema that we've done this year that we've seen. The first, and it's funny that you're not remembering because this kind of proves my point even further, is Megalopolis.
Oh, yes, of course, Megalopolis.
And it's funny because there is something that is trying, and again, to that point, I do love the ambition, even though it doesn't work.
Yeah.
But if you look at these two films next to each other, one takes you on like an entire complete emotional cinematic experience, and you never ever once question how long it is. And the other one is hyper interesting from time to time, but you don't really give a fuck about the story. Like, and there's just a very cool look. Like, when I think about The Brutalist, again, I will have criticisms of it. The swing, like, it's not even they're taking swings. I think every swing connects. Would I maybe arrange the field slightly differently in the third act? Yeah. But I think that ambition is equally matched with skill in this film, and the cast exemplifies that. God, friggin' I'm blanking on his name. The
Guy Pearce?
Yes.
Guy Pearce. I mean, Australian actor, grew up with him from Neighbours all the way through, to Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, to LA Confidential, to this now, with a long storied career in between, where the guy looks like a leading man. It's really unusual. He looks like a leading man, but often doesn't play one.
Playing Harrison Lee Van Buren.
But he's extraordinary in this. And it's just like all of his features are turned into precise instruments here. And he's superb actor. Again, I remember him from Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. And likewise in LA Confidential. And yeah, so exquisite. I think to that point, I'm sort of connecting a few interesting dots here about the elephant art versus termite art. And our response to Childhood of a Leader, and thinking about this and who you and I are as people.
Whoa, we're going all over the place.
Well, because I think the thing for me, when we think about Megalopolis, is yes, that is a film which I believe, if you go back and listen to that episode, we talked about the fact that, me personally, it's a film that doesn't work. It just does not work. But there were moments in it which I thought were exquisite. And I think the thing about Francis Ford Coppola that I think is always interesting is that he does swing for the fences. There's a famous quote about him, or a famous quote that he said during the making of Apocalypse Now. You can watch it in the documentary Heart of Darkness. Where he's like in the middle of the desert and he says, there's nothing lower than scum than someone who tries to make a pretentious film and fails. He's like, there's nothing worse than that. Like, someone who aims for the stars and misses completely. That is pretension. That is the worst thing. That is the worst thing you can do to an audience. And he says, and there's nothing worse than that. But what he's saying ultimately in that is he's saying that in the way that critics respond to films that shoot big and fail, the definition of pretension, or are unable to connect the thought and the idea, or the execution and the idea. And I think when it comes to you and I personally, I have a real personal soft spot for ambition. I do, because those are the films that I'm going to try and make and will probably fail at, and want to appreciate artists that are aiming for the stars. And Brady Corbet, in a couple of interviews that he's done recently, is like, making films, like I think he said something, it's sort of a counterpoint to the Francis Ford Coppola thing, which is like, making a bad film is really hard. Like, he was like, making
any film is really hard.
That's the point that he's making, is making a bad film is really hard. He said, so if you're gonna do it, you should aim for the stars. You should make a film. My philosophy, my personal thing, whenever we go into making anything, is, and it's because I've seen this play out in not just in metaphorical terms, but in literal terms. There are a couple of filmmakers I've seen who've only made one film and who've only had the opportunity to make one film. And I think my approach and thought has been, if you're going to make this thing, imagine it's the last thing you're going to, and apply that lens to it. And so that's just like a little bit of a personal kind of like what I think about filmmaking, and like why I have like more of a response to something like Childhood of a Leader, and why I kind of pushed for us to do Brutalist before it even won the Golden Globe, because I want to reward ambition even if it doesn't.
So I think Childhood of a Leader, it's funny. I was trying to think of a film that doesn't fit into this category, and I know that there are some. I know we've done them on the podcast, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. Childhood of a Leader for me is the kind of film that I do want to reward the ambition for, because even though it doesn't connect, even though I do think it's a little bit full of itself and it's getting a little bit obsessed with the cool things that it's doing, and you can kind of get that energy and that feeling that does come from someone, a younger filmmaker who is excited about what they're doing and doesn't quite know,
and has been around incredible filmmakers their entire life,
and didn't tamp that down or do whatever. And here I feel like for the Brutalist, the homeostasis is complete. Everything is perfect. No notes on that element of the creative process. I do think this might be where you and I differ. Every movie is incredibly difficult to make.
Yeah.
There's no question. No one sets out to make a bad movie.
Yeah.
That doesn't work. I think when the ambition or the feeling, at the very least, of look how cool I'm being right now, or look how good I'm, and Childhood of a Leader does not hit this. I'm saying other films, and I'll keep trying to think of an example. When it does get to the point where that greatly outweighs everything else, that's when I lose my, oh, well, I'm glad they shot for the stars, because it moves from them shooting from the stars to them consistently telling us how they're shooting for the stars and how great it is, like in a weird sort of sideways way, and still missing. And that makes the disconnect for me go farther and farther away. Again, that's the only subsection of the thing you've just described that I would kind of put myself on. I don't think Childhood of a Leader does that. I think it's exactly what you said. I appreciate the ambition. I liked looking at the elements of the film that really did work for me. I believe I called out a lot of the color grading or the way that they did different formats and things in that film.
Yeah.
Anyway, this isn't about Childhood of a Leader. This is about The Brutalist. Yeah. We will sort of get back, but it's hard. I love that we've done both of these movies, and I need to see Vox-Lux, which I don't know if it is critically acclaimed or not.
I think it kind of came and went. And the other thing with watching a filmmaker as their career progresses, I think both Vox-Lux and Childhood of a Leader did not make a lot of money.
Yeah.
But I think they signal to investors and people who wanted to put money into film that this is a filmmaker with a singular vision. So even if you don't like the movies, you can go, well, if I'm investing $5 to $10 million in this movie, which I think this movie is only $12 million, The Brutalist.
What?
Yeah, it's a $12 million movie. 12 to 15, in that range.
How does the film itself not cost that? Like, what?
I mean, that's the efficiency of doing a film with Brady Corbet, I guess, and having done 2 films of his before, where he is a singular-minded filmmaker with a singular vision. Paul Thomas Anderson is the same way. His films don't cost a lot of money. Things tend to cost a lot of money the more acclaim you get, because there is more of a budget on it. The Samuel L. Jackson thing, which is like the difference between a big budget movie and a low budget movie, is the craft services table. Like people on a low budget movie, people are less willing to spend money on things like the brand name actor on the top of the title and the PR around it, versus a high budget movie where you're like, well, all of these people are successful, so therefore we must put all this money into it. We talked about Jim Carrey just a couple of weeks ago, earning, his paycheck on certain movies during the 90s was $20 million.
Yeah.
I think his paycheck on Batman Forever was $20 million. So, it's ostensibly a low budget movie with a grand vision. Now, so we are going to talk about it for a little bit, and I want to talk about just where I come from as a person as well, which is that at one point in my life I wanted to be an architect. From the ages of probably like 12 through to 19, my life's ambition was to be an architect.
When did you discover you could stop time?
As a megaslopolis. I was never. I never look. I was a more of a deranged looking architect rather than a suave Adam Driver.
You never went back to the club.
I never went back to the club. But I wanted to be an architect. I love architecture. I love the process of it. I think architecture speaks to me in a way that is both artistic, in a sort of similar language to film, which is that architecture requires a degree of both engineering know-how mixed with artistic ambition or painterly ambition. And so there was a period in my life I absolutely wanted to be an architect. When my son was born in New York, the first thing we did, not for him, but for me, was to make a pilgrimage to Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water in upstate New York.
Oh yeah,
because I've always wanted to see that building, and that's Frank Lloyd Wright is not in the wheelhouse of Brutalist, but I came across the Brutalist architecture during my time as wanting to be an architect. The particular buildings that I was impressed by were by Le Corbusier, who is within the Brutalist movement, but earlier. And the thing about the Brutalist architecture is that it has its place, particularly in large institutional buildings. I think the Boston Town Hall is one of the most famous examples of Brutalist architecture.
I'm very familiar with that building.
Oh yeah, you've been there? Yeah, that's a large Brutalist building. The Salk Institute in California by Louis Kahn is another one as well.
Yeah.
So the term brutalism comes from this sort of like post-war industrialized process for building making, which favored, as opposed to sort of the Renaissance period of architecture, which favored more ornate designs or intricate designs, larger slabs of concrete were used. Now, concrete happened to be incredibly cheap as well, and as a post-war kind of
staple.
A post-war. I'm trying to not use the word ambition, but a post-war idea that we needed to house a lot of people very quickly. So could we make, and for architects, so for city planners, the idea was we need to house many people quickly as possible, and we need to do it in such a way that is cheap and efficient, which is why concrete is sort of the primary material. But for architects, it's like, well, okay, now I've got this thing, but this is the other thing I love about architecture. People need to live here.
Sure.
And architecture is not just concerned with the structural integrity of the building and the aesthetics of the building. But what I also love about architecture is the idea that the way a space is orientated and created and the materials used and the airflow and the light all contribute to the human experience of living in a building.
If it is designed
well. That's what architects primarily concerned with, is not just like when
some architects.
Okay, thank you. When an architect is talking to a client, an architect is talking about what does the client want to experience in that building? What do they want out of that building?
What's the win condition?
And how do they want to feel when they're in that? And like that's what an architect really has to think about, is how is that on a day-to-day basis going to experience that building? What is it going to be like when you walk up the steps in the Boston City Hall? What is that experience going to feel like? And how are they going to respond to that? Because an oppressively built building, which brutalism has some qualities to, can feel like you don't want to be in that space. And, it's a well-studied thing that architectural spaces can make you not want to be there. Like if you go to your DMV or if you go to industrial buildings in New York City that have not been considered with that in mind, you don't want to be there. And it is an oppressive place to be in. Whereas beautiful spaces like the Boston City Hall have this sort of large open scale to them. When they were designed, they have changed over time. That's the other thing with architecture. That are there to invite the public into an open and transparent space. That's, the
Boston City Hall is not that.
Yeah, well, it's changed over time.
Well, no, but I've been in and around that building quite a bit, and I know that tastes change and things like that. But there is a
want to make sure I'm referring to the right building.
I believe you. It might not be. It is a government building near the Emerson campus.
Yeah, this is the building where both.
Yeah, let's
about,
double
right?
check. Yes.
Yeah.
It does feel, and maybe it's just because Boston is often very cold and snowy, or it was.
Yeah.
It does feel incredibly oppressive.
Yeah, and I think like that those images there that I'm showing.
Yeah, they're just a lot of concrete open spaces, but a lot of like square window elements or openings.
And this is the challenge of brutalism.
Yeah.
So the challenge that brutalist architects wanted to, thought about a lot was basically using concrete, expressing the idea that concrete can be beautiful, and then how can we take what is essentially somewhat of an oppressive feeling, like material brutalism, and make it feel beautiful and make it feel designed and thought. So I'm going to show you a picture. By the way, this is the worst thing to do.
Yeah, what are you doing?
But the Salk Institute in Los Angeles is one of the prime examples of brutalism. And this is a space that is orientated towards
Google that right now so you can get the experience of Shahir turning his laptop to me.
Yeah, but so if you can, Google in front of you the Boston City Hall interior and the Salk Institute for Biological Studies. I love this, and so I'm very passionate about architecture because I still think as a filmmaker it still speaks to something I'm very interested in, which is again, how does it feel?
Yeah.
Like how do you engineer a feeling?
You're designing an experience.
And so in this movie, in The Brutalist, there's a moment where they walk into Van Buren's library. This is the first half of the movie, so we're not spoiling it. Regardless to say, we both like the movie, you should go see it. But Van Buren's son, played by Joe Alwyn, who we also saw in Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, says, my father lives here, spends all of his time in this library, and it's kind of just stacked with books, and there are these curtains where no light comes in. And immediately, Adrian Brody's character, Laszlo, immediately recognizes what it is. And this is what I mean when an architect is designing for a client experience. And this we'll talk about clients and patrons and when it comes to architecture and art and filmmaking. But he recognizes immediately what is going on in this room and can see a vision for an opportunity here. He immediately goes, why is this room so dark? Because these are first edition books that he doesn't want to expose to light. And so how do we let the light into this space, but also preserve the dignity of these books? There's a moment where he's showing his cousin, played by Alessandro Nivola, one of the first edition books, and his cousin throws it on the floor. And this is not something that Laszlo would allow because he understands that's what his client wants. One of the first assignments we got as an architecture student, so I did actually do at least 1 year of architecture studies, and I sort of prepped for architecture, was to design a space for a specific type of human being. So
Sure.
We were given a space and we were told to design it for an introvert, design it for a collector, design it for an explorer. And you have to really think about, like, how am I going to transform this space for this? And so this moment in this film, I got to be honest with you, as a person who loves architecture, who wanted to be an architect, who thinks about architecture a lot, there's a moment where Laszlo opens the library shelves that he has designed, and I wept. I actually cried. Like, I was so enraptured by this moment, because what he had designed was a way for all of the light that is by these windows to come into this building, but for the books to be protected. Mm-hmm. And then he placed a single chair at the center of it, where a single light would be, where Thomas
through the skylight,
where Van Buren could read his books and enjoy them. And that, to me, is the essence. It is a space that is designed specifically for that human being, that encompasses all of their needs, all of their desires. And what I love about that is he understood Van Buren better than Van Buren understood himself. And that's what, like, a beautiful architect can do.
Sure.
And so for me, like, again, enraptured by that moment.
Yeah. I think I'll yes and that as well, because sure. That's sort of the feeling of the first act of this movie, right? Like, I get that whole thing is entirely a wonderful experience that I think does encapsulate that love of in like architectural interior space design that you could also tie into cinema. You could tie that into cooking. You could tie that into, if I want to get personal, tabletop RPG design.
Yep.
Like there's things that you do to, I always use the term win condition because it gets my brain to where I want to go. But when designing anything, to design it successfully, you should figure out what the win condition of that design is. For an architect, from what you're describing, and I think for cinema and even cooking or any experiential thing, you want to know your audience and make sure that what you are building is the thing that they will either enjoy the most, have the most use for, etc. You want it to really encapsulate the experience that, or facilitate the experience that you want to give them. I think the cool part about this movie is it does all that. But then in the second and third acts, more the second than the third, you start to see what I think is, and this movie is saying a lot and doing a lot. But as far as we're talking about the sort of artist to patron relationship, we get into the thing, which is where I was interjecting before about architecture in general, not the theory or the design or the what an architect singular would want to do, because I think it's very much what you said. You get into basically the purse string holders and the people that are in control of larger projects that a singular artist most likely couldn't do on their own because they're not being commissioned for it or they don't have the funds or whatever. And you get into the roles of what is essentially businessmen. Even Van Buren says in this film, he's like, I don't have a lick of this talent.
Yeah.
So I need people to do it for me. And I think you can kind of see that frustration in a lot of places in the real world.
Yeah.
With people with exorbitant amounts of money that want to be seen as artistic or intelligent or funny, when in fact they're just savvy business people. And not everyone is good at everything, and there's stat blocks and all that stuff. Like you just kind of not everyone can be good at everything. So when you have these two things, you have a artist and you have a bankroller, a person, a client. You and I, Sheer, deal with clients, you more than me these days, all the time. And it can get hard because what the artist or what the artisan is trying to do is design something that they believe will be the best use case for the people that will use it on the daily, or the what they're considering the primary clientele. In this case, in this film, it is a community center he is building. So he's
the gym. It's a
whole bunch of shit.
It's
but he's trying to build something that, well, and near the end, you kind of realize there's one other element of why he's building what he's building.
Yeah.
But so it's weird because Laszlo in this film has two win conditions. One, beauty, art, getting the thing done to work for the people. And then two, his own ambition that he's tying into it, which again, artists do all the time. That's cool.
Yeah.
The interesting thing I bring up win condition for, and I think this movie explores quite interestingly, is at the end of the day, you have to separate. The win conditions are often not the same.
Yeah.
What Van Buren wants is, sure, a community space and something that is beautiful and that is functional, but he also has a couple other win conditions. He wants it to be seen as that while also not costing as much as it probably should cost. He has elements of his world that is basically like chipping away at the initial vision because he has his own win conditions, and as the bankroller, he gets to kind of do those. Now, does he do them in shady ways? Does he do a bunch of awful things? Absolutely. But the win condition, because of the deal that is struck between artist and patron, as it has been forever, they tend to be different. And I think it shows this film in particular shows the increasing difficulty and I'm trying to think of an awful word, like toxicity and harm that can happen in that relationship when it is not fostered in a correct way. And in this film, it obviously is not, even though it is a very slow burn across the 3 hours to get to that point. You see hints, you see other things about how how Van Buren treats Laszlo based around.
It comes in that first monologue that they have together at the party, when Van Buren talks about meeting his mother's parents, who were, in his words, layabouts or something like that, and he had come into wealth at that point, and he only agreed to see his mother's parents or his grandparents because they were his only family. And he had written a check, I think it was for $20,000 or something like that. $25,000. And he takes it to the family, and he leaves it with them, and he has a conversation about what they would do with it. And he realizes, I guess for him, he realizes that the family saw him as an opportunity for money as opposed to an opportunity to connect with them as a family.
Yeah, he says something specifically about how he judged their reaction and he could tell that they thought they should get more.
Exactly. And so he leaves the meeting, but he didn't sign the check. And when they come out and they acknowledge that he didn't sign the check, he tells them what he feels, which is that, like that they don't deserve essentially as much. And he writes them a much smaller check.
For $500.
For $500 and hands it to them and walks away and never sees them. And I think in that same conversation, he asks Laszlo why, what is it about his architecture? What is it about architecture that you love? And he says, Laszlo says something akin to there's a monologue in Good Will Hunting where Will Hunting says why did Beethoven play the piano or something like that? He just looked at the keyboard and knew what to do with it. Or he looked at the keys and knew what they were. Laszlo says, what is the best description of a cube other than the cube itself? And he says, my work will live when I, and tell a story beyond my life itself. And so, there you have two competing visions that is already going to be at head with each other. One that is the nature of the relationships that we will form and the work that we will make must reflect my intention and come back to me.
Right. Well, and this is the interesting part about that moment in particular. It is the moment, obviously, because of the story Van Buren tells, you understand what kind of man he is, and what Laszlo tells, you understand the kind of man he is. But then something happens in the middle of that story, a very small thing.
Yeah.
That I don't know. I'll speak for me. Perhaps you felt this way before in a client, artist or worker sort of thing where you're trying to land something as a maker.
Yeah.
And your client says something that tips you a little bit, being like, oh, this person's this.
Yeah.
Shit. But you want to do the work and exactly you need the money.
Yeah.
And there's a moment where Laszlo says something along the lines of well, what could they have expected? He plays into Van Buren's thing, and Van Buren's like, yes, precisely. And it's that moment of, and it's weird. That's the only moment in the movie where I feel like Laszlo actively plays Van Buren. And then for the rest of the movie, and before and after, Van Buren is kind of playing Laszlo.
I think Van Buren has a genuine love for what he does. And it comes from both seeing what his work was in a post-industrial Hungary and Europe, and also recognize. So the beauty of the library is Laszlo gives Van Buren something that he didn't even know he was.
I think there's a key to that too. So yes,
and the tricky thing then is Van Buren now comes to Laszlo and says, "This is what I want," and Laszlo is like, "Is it really?" And so Laszlo then does what great artists do, which is that he then finds a way to inject himself into that building because it's such a monument that he's creating.
Yeah.
And it is reminiscent. There's another Japanese architect, Tadao Ando, who designs with light. And you could see it in Le Corbusier's, he did this chapel as well, where, basically the building was designed and orientated towards what happens when light crosses this path at this moment. And you see it in this building, this sort of community center that he's building, where the light will pass over these gaps that will create a cross in at this marble chapel at this particular time. And you recognize that Laszlo as an artist, now Laszlo is a very flawed human being, by the way, and I like that about the film as well. But as an artist, he recognizes what the human experience is capable of and what buildings can do to foster that human experience. And in this case, he built something that not only speaks to sort of the gaudy sensibilities of what Van Buren wants, but also his experience. So when you're talking about that moment where Laszlo's trying to land the thing, you have to also remember what his experience in life has been up until that moment, which is that he has been exiled from Hungary. His wife and child are
still there.
His wife and niece, are still there, whom he writes letters to. He still loves art and he still believes in art, but he's been shoveling coal for the last year because Van Buren hated the library, because Van Buren is also a racist. We established that. He comes in and the main thing he yells about was that there was a Negro man on his property that his mother had to see. But he and that lost him his position with Attila, his Miller and Sons furniture designer, and so Laszlo himself has been ousted already. And so his experience also, I think the interesting thing that this film is also dealing with, as well as the patron art relationship, also savvily, I think Brady Corbet is tapping to like the filmmaker and producer relationship as well, is also about the immigrant experience to America and how the formation of America is about immigration and the relationship that we have to immigrants. And I think, Corbett himself said he wrote this under the first Trump administration. It has been the centerpiece of the second Trump administration. I'm not trying to make it all political here, but I'm just saying that in the ether that we're talking about, this is a film about an immigrant. Yeah. And about an immigrant that lands on our shores as a refugee and has something to offer if it can be unified in the right way. And I think that's a lot of what this film is also trying to do as well, is like, Laszlo has to find opportunities to express himself through the work that he does. And, to be clear, my
comment about him trying to sell was not a criticism. I think we've all done that. So let's back up a little bit about the sort of immigration story of it all, because we've touched on the sort of architectural bit for a little bit. The way that this movie shows what the immigrant experience must have been like for post-World War II refugees is striking. Oftentimes we think about it's so funny, and I guess this gets political too, but the way that in America, the way that we lionize how we like treated immigrants, like it seems like if you look at a lot of like the standardized history or whatever, like America's so open and loving and accepting and like all this stuff, give us your tired, your weak, or whatever. Like there's all that there, and there's elements of it, and there's definitely Americans who embodied that. But as institutionally, there's a lot of not that. I mean, the film we talked about last week, Nickel Boys, is a very different forced immigration. Like there's you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of different ways that that America has sanitized its outlook of its how it brings people in, when and why. And to look at this story based on what I know about history and based on the images that I saw, just felt like one of the most correct, accurate depictions of what this must have been like. I really love that Laszlo isn't like flawless artist.
He isn't the model citizen.
And it's funny. I go back to like between Laszlo and friggin' Adam Driver in Megalopolis.
Yeah.
Like one feels like a real person.
Yeah.
And one feels like a Batman villain.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to see, like, Laszlo is a drug addict, and he is a drug addict because he had to take heroin for pain due to an injury, and that was all that was there, and he got addicted to heroin. And so he has to deal with that. He also has an incredibly complex relationship and thought processes about his wife, Erzsébet, played by Felicity Jones, who fucking kills it in this movie.
The accent's a little hard on her, but she's good.
Yeah. The the way that that relationship is shown and the way that deep trauma affects their relationship, mix that with how they are treated once they are here, mix that with their two different immigration stories. Literally, Laszlo gets lucky enough to get on that boat specifically based on like a time or a lottery. I don't remember exactly how it goes, but the only reason that she gets to go there and the niece, Sophia, played by Raffi Cassidy, gets to come is through the Van Buren's connections.
Yeah.
And that's another reason why, and again, he doesn't, that gets all mixed in, and so it's almost like it's more of the artist under the patron's thumb in that way.
Yeah. Because
they're the lifeline for these people. Heck, Van Buren even gets Erzsébet a job at in New York as a journalist or a women's columnist.
Yeah.
And the way that is this is the other way. The way that Laszlo is treated, as opposed to, let's say, Gordon is treated, plays by Isaiah de Bancoli, I think, is so different. Based on, like, there's a couple different, like, truly, I think if the way that this is portrayed, Van Buren would treat them both the same, except Laszlo happens to be a world famous architect.
Yeah.
And so therefore he has value.
Yeah.
To him specifically.
Yeah.
And so the painting of the othering of people in this kind of this time period in America feels incredibly accurate based on the history that I know from, working on extra history or just other things that I've gleaned, that you don't often get to see the complex nature. Like, everyone in this movie has flaws because they all feel like people. Granted, some are more, in my opinion, in the moral spectrum, evil than others, but you don't like Laszlo all the time.
Yeah.
You don't like Erzsébet all the time.
Yeah.
You probably, if you have a conscience, don't like Harrison Lee Van Buren Sr. the entire time.
Yeah.
And so, I don't know, I found the dichotomy of playing with value as a commodity for the Americans who were here before.
Yeah.
Very clear. And like, this goes back to the runtime, because this movie deals with a lot of different things around all of the topics that we've discussed. Yeah. And I don't think that if this movie was shorter, it would be able to do that as aptly, as smoothly as it does. That makes sense? Like, you could cut this movie down if you wanted, but it feels like you would really lose.
You know who you would be if you cut this movie down?
Who?
You'd be the architect that was brought in who built a shopping mall. Like that.
Yeah, who maybe had a beautiful idea for the shopping mall, but the people building the shopping mall was like, well, we just need to move 500 people through this thing daily, and that's the like that's kind of what it.
That's what that's. Yeah. And I think that's the conversation that Laszlo has, and you realize as Laszlo starts making compromise, he doesn't make he refuses to compromise the vision. He's willing to compromise his compensation.
Yes.
So, and that's an interesting distinction between him and Van Buren, which is that here's a person who has not a lot, who is an immigrant, who is struggling through life as it turns out, when he was found, and who is willing to compromise on the sustenance that he will receive from this project in order to make the project closer to the vision that he espouses. And, as much as we're going to talk about Van Buren in a second in terms of what he does in the third act of this movie, there is something beautiful that Laszlo recognizes that is an opportunity here when a person appreciates his art. Van Buren also sees what he did and sees his art. And again, it comes back to the library scene for me. He sees the potential of what Laszlo can do when given the correct resources to do so. And as much as Van Buren's ego drives a lot of what he does, as much as he appreciates art but doesn't seemingly understand the sort of sacrifice you have to make or the compromises you have to make in order to complete your vision.
He likes art's reaction. He doesn't understand necessarily how it gets there, but if that art is tied to him, it makes him look good.
Yeah. So that, and you see that when they go to Carrera, Carrara, the Italian town where the marble is. And, like Van Buren is annoyed by the whole thing because it's like, why is this taking so long? Why is this guy coming down from the mountain that I have to like talk to? Like, this is why I don't do business with Italians, that sort of thing. But once he gets there and he sees the enormous scope of what it is they do, and he sees the water being drenched upon the marble, to kind of like give it life. And he realizes that it's a living, breathing thing, that he appreciates that. He doesn't appreciate the artisans that don't conform to essentially consumerism or capitalism in a sense. So I think Laszlo is very clearly appreciative of having someone that does recognize. Now, obviously, this relationship turns, and like There Will Be Blood, The Master, the P.T. Anderson films. The movie is nothing if not an examination of how capitalism and art can conflict with each other and hit each other in the head. And the thing is that they're two different outlooks on the world. And this is also, there's this thing with filmmakers, with an architect like Laszlo as well, which is that they're not immune to like understanding that things cost money and that there is procedure and steps and logistics and like, building a house is an entirely a project management exercise that involves mostly spreadsheets. And the challenge, and it's the same for filmmaking as well, is how do you communicate a vision through those spreadsheets? How do you through the spreadsheets, through the documentation, through the process, through the logistics, through all of that, hold on to a vision? And that's why I think the very, very, very final epilogue of this movie is chef's kiss brilliant.
Interesting.
I so loved that moment.
So I have a problem with the Van Buren action in the third act beyond just the morality of what happens. And
okay,
then
should we spoil that now?
Well, we will in a second. And I have an issue a little bit with the epilogue.
Okay.
But actually, before we do that, because I feel like that might be the larger conversation, unless I'm wrong, and then we can move a different direction. Is there anything in this film that you felt didn't work or you wished it did something different? Or does this feel really, really like the perfect experience that they were going for that you wanted?
I genuinely love the film. I think my first experience of it is that occasionally Laszlo's dissent around his coworkers, around Gordon, felt a little written, I guess, would be the way I would describe it. I love the sort of challenge, like the intricate way in which Laszlo and Van Buren have to maneuver around each other. And I found that to be really compelling. I think when it reflects upon Laszlo's treatment of the workers on the site and, his stress levels rising, so he fires people rampantly. He abandons his friendship with Gordon kind of easily. I found that to be, a little not just clumsy is the way in an extremely elegant film. An extremely beautiful, elegant film. That was sort of the clumsiest parts.
Yeah, I felt I like the term you use. I think because it doesn't necessarily mean awful. It felt written. Everything else feels lived in this movie, and there's elements like those in the third act. And I will actually tie in the Van Buren scene, which we'll talk about in a second. In those moments, for me, that felt written.
And then for a movie that's kind of poignant about the immigrant experience, it is a movie. James Gray made a film a few years ago called The Immigrant with Marion Cotillard and Joaquin Phoenix. Very good, by the way. This movie could have been titled The Immigrant. It could have been called The Immigrant. And as a movie that's pointed about that, and that as he identifies, written during the first Trump administration, and as one that we're sort of talking about in terms of the second Trump administration. The references to Israel as just the sort of promised land for Jewish settlers, I think, probably given where we are in history right now, probably could have done with a little more thought.
What are you talking about? Global powers after World War II rewriting almost every map over in that area of the world totally didn't cause any problems at all.
Yeah. So it probably could have done. It's, there's a thing about the scope of the movie, what the scope of the conversation is. It's not, a movie doesn't try to do every single thing and can't address every single topic. You can basically address the worldview of this character. And for this character, for a Jewish immigrant who, again, I love this moment when he meets his cousin Attila, who runs a furniture store called Miller and Sons.
Mm-hmm.
He says, wait,
who's Miller and where are his sons?
Yeah. So he says, so there's no Miller and there's no Sons. And he's like, yeah. And that reminded me so much of Stratton Oakmont I think it was called, in Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah.
He's like, we've been here since Columbus arrived and landed on the Plymouth Rocks. That's how long we've been here. And it's like, no, we just made that up.
Yeah.
And Miller and Sons is like, we have abandoned our Jewish identity, and we have crafted this story of legacy and permanence that does not exist.
People like a family business.
Yeah, and I think that's like a really smart telling of the immigrant experience.
Yeah.
So just as an aside, during the entire campaign, I got into heated conversations about immigrants with certain groups of mine, and it was I never wanted to play the card when it came down.
The presidential campaign. I was like, the campaign for the Brutalist.
No, the presidential campaign. I never wanted to play the card because we were talking about this is kids and all, and it's awful because there's a documentary that Anderson Cooper would do every week where he went into that community, or no, sorry, it wasn't Anderson Cooper, but it's his show.
Yeah.
They went into that community, and it's like the most striking thing, which is that there are Haitian immigrants. There's this man who was worked in a factory there who didn't speak English before, but spoke English enough to tell his story on national television in America.
Yeah.
And is like the extraordinary. Imagine you immigrating to China.
Oh God.
And then and learning the language and working and then being able to tell your story on national television. Extraordinary. And I think that this conversation about immigration has kind of like fallen into the wayside of demonizing people. And so it's lovely to see a film like this that like has immigrants that, like we can talk about, and it's not, like everything else. And the reason I didn't want to play this card is like, it made me realize that my family left Fiji for New Zealand because of a political coup, and we were immigrants to New Zealand. Now we had a different experience because we came in with money.
Yeah.
And we came in and my dad started a business, but like, it reminded me that like immigration, people who are immigrants, there's a bureaucracy to it that you have to navigate, as well as a cultural side that you have to navigate, as well as a political side that you now have to navigate. And all of it is hustling. All of these people are hustling. And that's what Laszlo is doing in this movie. He's hustling. I've immigrated to America and like, I'm trying to integrate myself into the bureaucracy of how America works, which is very different to the systems that I knew.
Yeah.
And what happens is you're displaced. You have no like sense of like, this is my place. You're like, this is the place that I am in right now. And how am I going to make that work? And that's this thing that Laszlo does. And, towards the end of the film, his family did immigrate to Israel, and he essentially started a legacy there. Now, yes, I wish that conversation was, given the sort of potency of the topic, was dealt with a little more, but I don't fault the movie for not having dealt with it because it's not within the purview of the movie to do it.
Right. So let's back up for a second.
Yeah, let's talk about the third act.
In the marble mining town in Italy.
Yeah.
Van Buren is like looming over like a party, and Laszlo is cheating on his wife a little bit, and there's this moment where Laszlo, I believe, who's probably strung out a bit again on heroin at the time, where Van Buren, and this is a bit striking here, but basically sexually assaults Laszlo. And it's not that like it didn't make sense. It's that it was one of the few moments that we'd talked about before that was like, yes, the writer is here.
Yeah.
It felt very like, oh, just in case you didn't get all this incredibly exquisitely explained through emotional tenor and tone and vibe, we're just going to do this thing to make it felt like a guarantee for the cheap seats, which felt so odd in this film. And then at the crux of the third act, when Erzsébet goes and interrupts dinner to accuse Van Buren of being a rapist in front of his family, it is powerful and poignant, but it felt, I think, because we'd gotten to the point of like going so on the nose with the like analogy of the entire thing that it felt like I don't want to sound too harsh on this because again, I don't want to make it seem like this movie is not worth your time. It is incredibly worth your time, more than most every other film this year is worth your time, especially all 3 hours and some change of it. But it felt like the most pedantic way I can say it, and I'll walk it back a little bit. It felt like an unearned victory lap for something that is not what, like, the movie already exquisitely made its points. And then with the nebulousness of where we leave Van Buren into the epilogue, it makes the largest deal of that, and it's a big deal, obviously, in the narrative itself, but then it sort of like goes away from that instantly in the epilogue and goes into, which again, nothing's wrong with the epilogue, but you've kicked me down this road. The movie has kicked me down this road. And then I'm like, well, okay, cool, shit. Oh, now we're just on a different road. And you learn an extra thing about why. And honestly, an incredibly interesting and moving and poignant thing about why Laszlo wanted to keep the ceilings the same height, because it's the same diameter, same design as the camps that he was in, except way taller.
And Elizabeth's size was next to it as well. So it's made up of 2 towers.
Yeah.
One for Elizabeth, one for him, but except much higher.
Higher. Yeah. So like there's and again, those are the beautiful, poignant, deep meaning things that artists have to sadly sneak into things to get them done. And it's a real capitalist versus artist sort of feeling to it. That it's great. But I think the juxtaposition, maybe this is what it really is. I don't think I have a problem with the epilogue. I have a problem with the pacing of what happens at the end of the third act into the epilogue, because it feels like it went way harder than it needed to for the topics and the tone and what it was trying to say, that I felt like the movie already really hammered home. And then it drops that instantly and goes back to, again, the very poignant and important ways that artists can, I don't want to say triumph in small ways, but like get across their initial vision and how that is important and why that is important. It felt like it was a bump on the road that made the car like swerve off of it. And rather than see the car right itself and put it back on the road, we cut to, and it's on a highway. And you're like, I didn't understand why that choice was there.
So, I guess I didn't. The second half of the film is what is critiqued the most as not working as well as the first half.
Well, you've been sitting for 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Yeah. So the thing about that sequence is like that was the first sequence in a while. My audience was largely quiet during the film. You know, of course, there's sort of it's a symphonic movie. There's a lot of music going.
Sound design,
it's beautiful. The score is incredible.
Yeah.
But that sequence was the first one where you heard people going, "What the?" You know, like you just heard people kind of audibly gasp and sit up in their seats. And I agree with you in part, which is that it is a sort of physical manifestation of all of Van Buren's demons, right? And the thing that I sort of thought about was his perhaps his relationship to his mother, which seemed a little bit like Norman Bates-ish, or something like that, you know. And it basically, to me, that sequence played out as a infantilized man who doesn't fully, you know, who thinks that what he wants can be taken at any time, and he's seen that he's got this sort of vision of the people that work around him as layabouts, as people who don't appreciate schedules and that sort of thing. He's in Italy. He's annoyed by the fact that they have to wait at this cafe for this guy to come down, and they're singing and dancing in amongst the cabins. And he's like, these are the people I'm paying to bring marble to my place. You know, why are they singing and dancing? And he witnesses Laszlo at that moment sort of embracing and dancing with another woman.
Well, making out with her. Yeah.
But Laszlo pulls himself away because he realizes he shouldn't do this. Not to say Laszlo is a perfect human being, by the way.
Right, we're going to say.
He's made choices throughout the film. So I think it's an extension of this idea that Van Buren has, that people don't adhere to his strict view of schedules, of timing, of money, and all that sort of stuff. And that's what he takes. The other side of it that I saw is that Laszlo's experience is entirely about suffering. Like everything in his life, like think again about being displaced from Hungary through the World War II, having, to be removed and separated from your family, to like having no home, to like living in the place that you do, to confronting the fact that people have to abandon their identity, like the Miller and Sons abandon their Jewishness. And he's like, is that what I'm going to have to do here? So his entire life is about suffering. And the thing that I sort of, when I saw that sequence, the later sequence when Elizabeth confronts Van Buren about it. Elizabeth, yeah, sorry. My thought was, why isn't the writer in the film putting Laszlo to confront him at this moment? But what comes before this is Elizabeth is in extreme pain, and Laszlo doesn't know what to do with it, and he's been using heroin for the better part of his life, and he's run out of pain medication for Elizabeth. So the only thing he can think to do is to give her heroin.
Yep.
So he gives her heroin, and for 3 straight days, or maybe a week or something like that, they basically go on this heroin bender where they make love for the first time in the movie that I think we've seen for a while. And he's weak to her, and she's weak to him as well. And they're kind of weak with each other, and their suffering basically comes out in this week-long time. And what I love there is this idea that she loves him so much that she confronts Van Buren about it. Like they have a partnership. And then when we get to the final scene, we realize that he made that building as a monument to her, and then just on top of that, it's poetic, but I love it. Is as a filmmaker, I would have, this is me, as a filmmaker who loves architecture and wanted to be an architect, there's a certain way I film building, and I would film TV shows for architecture, housing shows. And my instinct always is to like lavishly light and shoot a building as though it was a work of art, and like, show the light coming through it, basically show all the intention. Do the thing was like, hey, you look what this building did, and this movie has essentially kind of that scene, but as Van Buren gets lost in it. And what it embodies that's better than what I would have done, certainly, and why I liked it more than what I would have done, is that the building is no longer just the sort of discussion of like these clever things that Laszlo has, put into it. It is the spirit of the building was intentionally designed to be a monument to his mother. And ultimately it swallows Van Buren up, and we don't know what happened to him. And I was quite, again, like the moment in the library where the light opens up and, we see the books being protected. That was a moment where I was like, Laszlo has won. He has created a building that swallowed Van Buren whole.
Sure. And I like that read of it. I think that it's funny. Everything that you have described in my head and on paper and in this discussion, I'm like, that's great. When watching it specifically, it's almost like the moments that I've described, we don't have to keep talking, going back and forth, just in an otherwise impeccably displayed film of human emotion and folly and joy and art and capitalism and all of that, felt like now it's time to ratchet up the evil a little bit more, just in case.
I can see that.
And because I could see a version of this film where that particular sexual assault or that violation doesn't happen, and you have almost the entirety, you could do it in a different way and have it honestly feel more tonally flow with the rest of the film. I actually think you could take that moment, have that moment happen in the same way, and it could feel a little less ham-fisted than I felt like it did in the movie. It just there's a certain clumsiness to the way it's executed, but and again, this is not I'm just straight
clumsiness in a very elegant movie.
And I think this will be my final thought. It is a minor clumsiness that is only visible, in my opinion, because of how impeccable the rest of the film is. I think if there's one flaw as a whole, it's that because 95% of this thing is near perfect, you might notice the 5% that isn't more than if the rest of the film was lesser.
In terms of that conversation about elephant art and red art, I think also this is a film. Why, the marketing for the movie has been the word monumental repeated over and over again by many critics. And when I saw the reviews come out of about the film, that was the conversation, was like, it's a towering achievement. And you can certainly see that way. But I think one of the things about the way that phrasing has been made, a towering achievement, monumental, and all that sort of thing, and the impression I get from the film is the impression that has come for a film like P.T. Anderson's There Will Be Blood, which is that it is a film that's going to live within the ether of our cinematic ecosystem for the next 30 years.
Sure.
And that's why it's important. And so when a film like that comes along and happens, Moonlight is the last one I can think about that did that. And oddly, Avengers Infinity War, right? Like, those are films that are going to live within the context of the ether of our ecosystem for a long time. What those films do is it's not just even the phrase rewatchability. They grow and change with our viewings every time. And we're just experiencing the first viewing now.
Yeah.
But those viewings will change and they will become less like, oh, I would have made this decision differently, to more of, that was the decision that was made. Like, how does that fit within this film?
Well, they could.
Yeah, I think it will. And, for my sort of prime example of that is like at the end of There Will Be Blood, spoilers for the end of There Will Be Blood, when Daniel Plainview, kills Eli Sunday with a bowling pin and says, "I'm done." I was like, "What just happened?" What just happened? But the more I've watched it, the more that moment is a culmination of everything that's been happening before. And I think the more we will watch The Brutalist in years to come, the more we will see Van Buren's behavior, and the fact that he gets, again, for me, the thing in the first viewing only is that he gets swallowed up by this building and disappears from the movie.
Yeah.
It's a poetic disappearance.
Yeah. And it's funny. That read is one that I hadn't initially thought of, and I do like that in that.
Yeah. It's almost like he evaporates from the movie.
Because my frustration, I think it was exacerbated by just going to the epilogue right after, was that it felt unfinished, but the way you are describing it does make it feel finished.
Yeah.
So there's that element to it. Of course, it was just a slight tonal thing.
And then the end, which is like filmed in Betamax, And what I love there is the commitment to the bit. Yeah, it's not like
bit commit there.
Yeah, well, because then he shows clips of the buildings as though they were filmed by 80s television producers who don't have an appreciation for it. And I was like, completely committed to the bit. And this, again, chef's kiss. Toth's granddaughter, I think it is.
Yep.
Comes on stage, tells a story about Toth's architecture through it. And I was
his niece.
His niece, whoever it is. And tells a story of his life, his work. And you see that there's a legacy that he has created. And this is, again, a man who started with no home, no place, and becomes an immigrant, and also, establishes himself into this place. And she says this line that I think is one of my favorite lines in all of movies, will be for all of time. And she says it in this sequence, and it will be definitely within my, favorite moments of the year. She says, "No matter what anyone tries to sell you, don't forget it's the destination, not the journey." And I was like, oh my God, I love this movie at this moment. And then the Italian pop song, "One for You, One for Me" plays, which I think was just so, I walked out of this movie floating on air after that sequence, because it was so exuberant and out of context exuberant in a moment that didn't warrant it. But so the way we've always heard that thing is like, it's not the destination, it's the journey. And that's the way that phrase has always been used. Yeah. And what she says is, don't let anyone, no matter how much anyone tries to sell you this, it's the destination, not the journey.
Right.
And when you think about Laszlo's journey, which has been pain, suffering, and all that is left behind is the cube. Like, what is the best description of the cube but the cube itself? What is left is up for him is the destination, which is these buildings. That's what he wanted, and that's what he's created. And it's not the story of the suffering that got us there. It is the final product. And I was like, what a and that speaks to so much to like what the way I think about filmmaking as well. It's like the audience doesn't care how hard it was to get this permit to shoot in this place in this one day.
Right.
What they care about is, what does the scene mean?
Yeah.
And like, how does it make them feel? What does the library mean? The library, the reason why Van Buren like is so struck by it is that it understood him more than he thought anyone did.
Yeah. I like that the movie takes that phrase and turns it on its head.
I love it.
We don't have to get into this. I think that is a very lovely sentiment and something that can be true. I also don't like the absolute of it. Like, it's just a personal thing. I think both can be important, both destination and journey, but we always hear it's not the destination, it's the journey. So it was really nice to look at the flip side of it and be like, yes, that is also true.
Yeah.
Like, so I did very much appreciate that.
It's taking it from the point of capitalism versus art in that moment.
Yeah.
It was like, no matter how much anyone tries to sell you, it's the journey. It's actually the destination.
Yeah. So it's good. Yeah.
I can't tell you how big a grin I had on my face. Like, so you're talking about the stride of pride.
Yeah.
Walking out. I walked home because I went and saw this down on 14th Street, caught the subway there and all that sort of stuff. I was just ecstatic out of this.
Yeah.
I was like so happy.
I was so happy I went and put in a podcast of us talking about a different movie.
Yeah.
No, again, if you can find, I imagine by the time the Oscars roll around, if there'll be some screening somewhere if you're near a major metropolitan area, and if this does sound up your alley, definitely go see it. I don't think you could watch it at home on streaming or eventually on physical if you can snag it.
No shame in the game.
No, but there is something to sitting in a packed theater sort of around this, and I think the theaters will be more packed because there'll be less screenings, even though there will be. Because again, I imagine in the world of trying to make as much money at the theater as possible, in the capitalistic hellscape that we do live in, the turnaround for a 3.5 hour movie will make them less money than the turnaround for a 2 hour movie. So it's going to be 100%. A hard sell. But it is worth your time if you can figure.
But a young filmmaker making that choice and saying no.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of
you know what it's just because we're watching Marvel movies at home. He's Captain America in that moment, saying, "No, you move."
Yeah,
and I'm like, yeah,
look at you making Marvel references.
There you go.
Well, this has been the only podcast about the film The Brutalist. Shahir, when you are not brutally executing your vision to ensure an emotional resonance in all of the work that you do, where can folks find you?
You can find me barely keeping my house tidy for a person who loves architecture so much at my website, nobody says www, at suvanova.com, suvanova.com. It's a habit I'm trying to break, by the way. Matt, when you are dripping liquid onto marble right around your desktop, where people find you?
You can find me doing that to my abs, which is what I've nicknamed marble, over at my website, http://www. YouTube.com/extra history or /extra credits. Or maybe the first backslashes aren't backslashes, they're just regular slashes. Who knows? Check out the good work we're doing over there.
Skibbity. That's what the kids are saying.
Yeah. I think by the time this comes out, we will be on to, God, I might be wrong. We're doing a series on the unholy Roman emperor himself, Frederick II.
Okay.
A gentleman who ruled a lot of places and who was excommunicated by the Pope, different popes, 2 to 3 times, depending on who you're asking.
Right.
It's fucking crazy. So please go check that out. The series has been wonderful to work on. Next week, there'll be a movie.
I'm not sure what we're doing next week.
We'll figure it out.
Amelia Perez is getting a lot of buzz after the Golden Globes as well. Maybe we should fill that in.
Yeah.
Write us in, onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com. Tell us what you're watching. Tell us what we should be watching. Tell us how we should watch things better. Because we do them wrong.
Do all those things then, please. Okay, bye.
Yeah. Bye.